just a quick note, final sponsor, read, video, everything. Last one, JetBrains, PHP Storm. They just wanted to kind of give back to the community and have me let you know about PHP Storm. I'm sure you know about PHP Storm, but check it out. The latest version has a bunch of new Laravel specific stuff with artisan command and parameter completion, a bunch of other things. So check that out, and thanks to JetBrains. Okay, it's home stretch time now. Home stretch time. We're not slowing down the quality here. Okay, here comes Tim.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good evening.
Yeah.
Morning, where you
How
are.
are we doing?
Good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Awesome. Excellent. Well, I'm going to let you take it away.
Sounds great. Let me just share my slides here. Excellent. You can hear me all good? Everything's working? Great, fantastic. Working. Lovely, excellent. So my talk today is called Follow the Eloquent Road. And this talk's just kind of a personal story, kind of a journey from me being a WordPress developer through to being a Laravel developer. We're going to work through some examples, but I don't want to focus too much on the specifics of the examples. At each stage, I kind of want to take a step back and kind of look at it from a higher level about what we've changed, why we've changed, and see the benefits that we get along the way with all these small changes. And this is all totally from my experience. So your mileage may vary. And if I say we or you, I'm really just talking about myself. These are just things that I've done and the experiences that I've had working with Eloquent and Laravel. And I guess it kind of is the story of where Eloquent takes us. What is the path that we're going to follow? So the things that we're going to look at is we're going to look at moving things up and down the existing stack, moving things sideways into new infrastructure, and getting a deeper integration with Eloquent. And this will all make sense as we kind of make our way through. So my name's Tim. I'm a software developer, musician, and I just love doggos. As a matter of fact, the only reason I agreed to do this talk was so I could introduce everybody to my doggo. This is Taz. And you can probably tell by this picture, I think it's pretty obvious that he's a pretty dang good boy. So, you know, Laravel has brought us all together, but I think it's all these other things that kind of keep us together. You know, our interest in music, our interest in doggos, whatever it is. And we did this last year at Laracon. I want everybody to tweet me the pictures of their pets. I don't care if it's a dog, a cat, a turtle, whatever it is. I want to meet them. Taz and I sat down for like a couple of hours last year and just met all the Laracon AU pets. And it was just the best time ever. So go do that. Don't worry about this talk. Go do that. Anyone who is still here, like I said, I was a WordPress developer. And what that really meant for me was I was a functions.php developer. And anyone who's worked in WordPress knows exactly what I'm talking about. So functions.php, if you want to do something like intercept a request with WordPress, boom, it goes in your functions.php file. If you want to do something with a contact form, you're going to do it in your functions.php file. And if you're in trouble, you don't know what you're doing, what do? We Stack Overflow it and we copy and paste the answer into our functions.php file. But what that meant is that this file just got bigger and bigger, and it became like the whole application was in this one file. So slowly we kind of worked out ways to pull things out, maybe using includes or something like that to kind of slimline this functions.php file. Then I became a Laravel developer. And I didn't know when I came to Laravel what middleware was, what gates were, what commands were, what composer is. I remember watching a video of Jeffrey Way kind of teaching me how to install Laravel for the first time, and I'm typing things into my terminal. And I'd never even opened the terminal before. I didn't know what any of these things were. And what's more is all these things are kind of infrastructure terms, you know, like middleware, gates, commands. I didn't know what all that was. You know, if I'm building a shoe store, I know what shoes are. I don't know what a middleware is. So the thing that I did get straight away was Eloquent. I understood it because I knew that I needed a way to put things in the database and get them out. And it spoke the language that I was using. You know, I saw you create a comment, these things. And what that meant, as I went down my path, basically my entire application was put into Eloquent because it was a safe place and I understood it. And this didn't really remain sustainable. After a while, I wanted to kind of move things around and put things in different places. So what I want to do today is kind of have a look at some existing structure and look deeper into Eloquent for new ways we can kind of shift code around. And like any good adventure, it's all about the journey. Some of the answers to these things are quite boring. You know, it's going to be use this existing thing that you probably already know about. But like I said, I want to take a step back and look at each little change that we make and why. And the first thing I want to look at is forms and how Eloquent interacts with forms. So what I would like to do is on my models, I wanted to have a really nice clean API in my controller. So what I would do is I would create this static method, create from request. And that meant any mess that was around creating the adventure from the request was kind of tucked away in the model. And if we jump into that method, it might have looked something like this. So we're creating an adventure that gets assigned to the authenticated user, and we just use the validated data off the request. And everything was good and it worked great. But inevitably along comes some complexity. So we're creating an adventure, but now we also on the same form, in the same request, need to create a character. Well, no problem. We've already got this pattern that we're using. So we'll just add create request to the character as well. But something's changed that we're not seeing here. We need to jump back into that adventure, create from request method, and see what we've had to change. Okay, so we've had to get rid of this first method, and now it's a little bit more messy here. And you can also see we're kind of plucking all this data off the request. We're plucking the destination, the purpose, the starts at, the user ID off the authenticated user. We're very envious of the data that's on the request in this method. But you know what? It totally works. It's absolutely fine. And we've still got that nice clean API in our controller. But inevitably, along comes some more complexity. So now we've got to add an admin area so that administrators can create adventures on behalf of other users. And admins, well, they can assign an adventure type, but the users cannot. So now we've got this added complexity where the admins have to be able to select a user, so we no longer get the ID from the authenticated user. And they've also got this other form input called type that they can specify. So we need to work out, how do we put that into this method? What are we going to do? This is where we've decided we want to put this work. Well, we're probably going to end up doing something, like this, where we've got the request and we've got to do like an instance of admin adventure request in there. Or maybe we want to check if it's like an admin route and then we'll like assign the type and the user ID in a different way. Not really much of a fan of those options. I guess another option is we could add a create from user request, create from admin request. But that kind of feels a bit hairy to me. What's a user request? Admin request kind of makes sense. So what else can we kind of do? And again, we're trying to move things off our models at this point because we've got quite big models. So adding 2 methods just to support this functionality isn't the path I want to go down. Okay, so let's kind of break this down. What have we got? Well, this system that we've got on the left-hand side is that user-facing request. It hits the controller, and then it's trying to do all the work in the model. And on the right-hand side, we've got this admin request. It hits its own controller, and then again, tries to join that model stuff that the other controller is using as well. So this isn't working for me where we've got it in the model. So what I want to do is I want to start seeing if we can just shift things up. I just want to kind of take a reset, put things back into the controller and rethink this kind of structure. So we've just moved it back up into the controller now. I don't really like this. This is the admin version of it. You can see we're getting the user ID from the form and the type, but I've lost that clean API in the controller. There's a lot of noise here that I don't want to be seeing. So what else can we do? Okay, so pushing that up into the controller didn't work. What if we pushed up again into those requests, into that user request and into that admin request? What would that look like? Well, we could create an adventure payload method on the adventure request, and it's going to collect its own validated data, pluck out its own information, merge in the user ID from the authenticated user, and return that in a nice clean package for us to use. And in the adventure request, we can do the same thing. We get the destination, the purpose, and the starts at, but now we're getting the user ID from the form and the type from the form. And that is all its own data. It's not envious of its own data because it owns it. And here's our controller. So this is what it did look like. But now with this refactor, we return to that nice clean API. So we tried to push things right down, but it wasn't working for us after a while. So then instead we took a step back and we looked, where else could we do this? Maybe we could push things up the other end of the pipe. And this supports the adventure, but the admin and the user controller would both look like this, which is fantastic. But we also have to support the character creation as well. Well, that's no problem at all. We just do exactly the same thing. We follow that same pattern. We create a character payload on both requests. And that way, when the administrators can do something special with the character, all we've got to do is go into that character payload on the admin request, and we don't have to change anything in the model. So what have we done here? Well, there was a lot of churn in that method. Every time we needed to change something on the form, we had to keep going into the model, and that create from request method kept churning. It was also locked into one type of request, and quite often forms can get quite complex in their structure and having multiple areas where you can create something from. So if I see a create request method and I can't use that for every request that comes in where I need to create something, that just feels a bit weird to me. So we've improved interactions between objects as well. We're no longer plucking that data off the request. We're getting the request to give the information to the adventure. It's bundling it up for us, and the adventure is just receiving it, and the controller is coordinating that interaction between objects. We've created a nice naming convention. So we've got adventure payload, character payload. And payload's a nice word because it's not specific like adventure attributes or character attributes, because we might want to pass through a file or anything, but it's a nice kind of more generic word. We've also pushed data preparation to the boundary. So the request is making sure that the data is in a good state before it enters our application. Previously, we were down in the model and trying to reshape the form input, and that's quite far away from where it entered our system. But this has allowed us to push it right up to the very into our system. We've got the right user. I think it was Caleb Porzio, our previous speaker, who said you can push conditionals to the very edges of your system, so much so that they pop off completely. And that's what we've done. The admin and the user flow no longer have a conditional to check if we're in the admin or the user area. And we've thinned out our models by removing those static factory methods off the models. So the next thing I want to look at is abilities. No doubt in your application, you've got something like this somewhere along the lines. You're checking, okay, if you're a moderator, you can do this particular action. And then eventually, you've probably got some other areas where, okay, a moderator can do this thing and an admin can actually do this thing as well. And then I'm sure you've got other places where, you know, there's a moderator, an admin, and a super admin. And then eventually, no doubt, Gary comes along. And Gary can do this as well. Why can Gary do this? No one knows, but Gary's allowed to do this particular action. And if we take a step back and look at our user model, you see we've got quite a few methods on here. Is Gary, is moderator, is admin, is super admin, is little less than admin, little more than moderator. There's a lot of things on here. And what's more is I quite like to create the inverse of a lot of these kind of checks as well. So if we've got an is admin, I quite like an is not admin. It's just a little bit more readable than chucking a bang operator before the check. So that means we've just doubled the amount of methods we've got to kind of check if these users are things. What's more is I kind of feel the more I look at user is admin, it really feels like you're asking if the user is an instance of admin. It just kind of doesn't feel right to what we're actually trying to achieve. In your views, we end up with things like this, where we've got these huge checks. So an admin can do this, a super admin can do this, and Gary can do this. And then we show the button. And then what we have to do is on the back end, where we actually allow that action to happen, we have to keep this long conditional chain in sync. So, you know, when we add Gary, or if we add a moderator to this check, we've got to make sure we add it to the appropriate places in the views as well. So how can we kind of rethink this? So this is the structure that we've got. We've kind of got on the left-hand side, that's the controller that does the work. We've got to protect the back end. And on the right-hand side, we've probably got a lot of these kind of views just randomly through our application where we show this button. Maybe we show it in a header, maybe we show it in the footer. And we've got to keep those things in sync. Well, there's not really anything connecting these things the way that we've currently got it set up. But luckily, there's some existing infrastructure called a gate. So we can define a gate called dispatch flying monkeys, and gates allow you to have fine-grained permissions in your application. So it also gives us a really nice place to be able to comment why things are happening. So for example, Gary is the CEO's son, and apparently he just needs to be able to dispatch the flying monkeys just every now and then, just whenever he feels like it on the weekends, things like that. So Gary can go in here. We've got a nice place to document why Gary's allowed to do this. And our big long conditional chain no longer is checking if you're an admin or a super admin or if you're Gary. It's checking if you can dispatch the flying monkeys. And that's when we show the button. Same thing on the back end. We no longer have to maintain the sync between the back end and the front end. We can just, oh, wrong way. We can just change this to say that the user cannot dispatch the flying monkeys. Another great benefit of using the built-in infrastructure is that there's a built-in middleware called CAN, and it allows us to say, all right, this route, if you access this route, you have to be able to dispatch the flying monkeys, which means our controller now boils down to this. We've gotten rid of that conditional completely. So what have we done here? We've centralized and kept logic in sync between the front end and the back end. We've allowed for reasoning comments to say, why are you allowed to do these particular things? We've utilized existing infrastructure rather than creating something ourselves. We've changed the way we're talking about permissions. We're no longer saying, are you this? Are you that? We're asking, can you do this? Can you do that? So it's no longer, yeah, are you this? You can do this. And we've thinned out our models. We've moved a whole bunch of methods. We can just remove all of those completely from there and just rely on all the logic in the gates instead. So taking a step back again, looking at the previous two examples, on the left-hand side, the first box here has got create from request, create from user request, create from admin request. Is it an admin route? Is it an instance of the admin request? None of this speaks any of the domain language that we're building. And it was on the model. These things are on our domain objects, but they don't speak that language. And surprisingly, when we moved it off our domain objects, we actually got domain language in other parts of our application. So the request adventure payload, that speaks the language that I'm expecting. That's the payload for the adventure. Great. That makes sense to me. Same thing with the admin. So is admin, is moderator, is super admin? What does that even mean? What is admin versus super admin? These are kind of things we have in our system, and we know what they mean in our heads, but only by checking what these things can do. Instead, we've been able to change the language completely to say the user can dispatch the flying monkeys. So we've been able to thin out our models while also improving the readability and the domain language that we use in our applications. Okay, 1 second. Just going to have a quick break. And we're back. Okay, so Eloquent. I just want to dig a little bit deeper now into Eloquent. We're used to the model. When we create an instance of an Eloquent model, we get an instance of the Eloquent model. Well, I think we're all pretty familiar with this idea. We create the which class and it is our Eloquent model. So when we think about Eloquent, that's exactly what we think about. We think about model.php and all the classes that extend that. But what we don't think about sometimes is how ingrained the Eloquent collection actually is into Eloquent, because we seamlessly get these collections and work with them. So when we pull out a result set from the database, we get a whole heap of Eloquent models wrapped up in this Eloquent collection. And the Eloquent collection is a specific type of collection built for the Eloquent model. It just has some helpers on there that are more, do things like check the ID of an Eloquent instance. So now we can add Eloquent collections and the Eloquent model to our idea of what Eloquent is. But of course, we're missing one last piece, and that is the Eloquent builder. So whenever we start these chains of query scopes to kind of filter results, we're using the Eloquent builder. And again, this just seamlessly happens. We don't think about it. It's all taken care of us under the hood. So that means really, Eloquent is this seamless collection of the builder, the model, and the Eloquent collection. And you can see this in play here. We are going to pull out a result set from the database and get an Eloquent collection. So we've got family members, we want them in a random order. We're only going to take 3 of them, and then we're going to get those results. So we've just got 3 family members here in an Eloquent collection. And then we're going to do some work with it. And then at the end, we're actually going to convert from a collection back to a query. So we're going to call family members to query, and then we're in the Eloquent builder. So we can call update on that, and it's going to update all of those in the database for us. So you can see that these are completely tied together seamlessly. We can go from an Eloquent instance to an Eloquent query, to an Eloquent collection, from an Eloquent collection back to an Eloquent query. So now I want to talk about collections, and I'm just going to rocket through this. I did a whole talk on this at Laracon AU. If you want to check it out, if you're interested in these kind of ideas, you should definitely check that talk out. I went into a lot of really cool things that you can do with collections and why you might want to do those things in more detail. And there's a whole heap of other really good talks there. So I recommend checking out all the Laracon AU talks as well. So Eloquent collections. Imagine through your application, you have these collection pipelines, and they're kind of very similar in a lot of places. So this is like 3 examples that are exactly the same that you've maybe taken from different parts of your application. It's just some repeated logic. So we've got this bunch of family members in an Eloquent collection. We're filtering out Dorothy, and we're going to loop over each member and get them to take shelter in the storm cellar. And we do that 3 times throughout our application. And what we'll notice is that we always call this take shelter method in a collection pipeline. We never get one instance of a family member and tell them to take shelter. We always want to do it as a family. So it always happens as a group in a collection pipeline. Okay, so just moving from there for 1 second, how do we even get an Eloquent collection? Where does that come from? Well, there's a method on the model called new collection. And as you can see here, I've just shifted it from the base model up into the family member class, just so you can see it. And as you can see, it gets passed in an array of models, and all you do is return a new instance of the Eloquent collection. So what if we created our own version of the Eloquent collection specifically for family members? Just like the Eloquent collection is a specific version of the base support collection. Well, then what we could do is, instead of returning the Eloquent collection, we could return our dedicated family member collection from this model. So whenever we get a collection of family members from the database, we're actually going to be working with this new family member collection class. Now, this take shelter method on the model, we've just expanded this just so we can see that it's maybe got step 1 and step 2 in it. But we only ever work with it in a collection pipeline. So we're actually going to remove it from this model, and we're going to place it on the family member collection. And in here, we just loop over all the instances of the family members in this collection and do step 1 and step 2 on those within the Eloquent collection itself. So we've removed that method and the logic from the model. So now, when we're looping over our family members and we're getting rid of Dorothy, and then we're calling take shelter on each member, that method is no longer on the member, it is actually on the Eloquent collection itself, which means we can tidy that code up and just call take shelter, and it's going to take care of making sure that everyone in that collection takes shelter in the storm cellar. Something a little bit more real world and getting rid of that kind of storyline is something like invoices. Imagine you've got a bunch of invoices and you want to get the total cost of these invoices. You might call reduce, calculate the money, and get a total cost out. Well, we could remove that from the invoice collection. Sorry, not remove it. We could actually wrap that up on the invoice collection and just call it total cost. So we can kind of wrap that logic up into a nice, small, tidy package. For a full walkthrough of all these things, check out the talk that I mentioned and check out all the others as well. I've also got a blog post on the idea, which will link to the talk at Laracon AU as well as my slides. So what did we do here? We pushed problem space methods to a different part of Eloquent while still leaving them in Eloquent. And these methods already spoke the language of our domain, and we're keeping that language intact. We've promoted collections within our system. So we've got another way of thinking about things. We can think about things in bulk actions and in individual actions. And it doesn't mean that your single Eloquent model can't access those methods. In this talk that I gave, you'll see that you can still actually do the same thing. And this is something that Laravel actually already does under the hood in some places. And we've also thinned out our models by removing things off our models. And in the talk, we talk about improving readability, extracting repeated logic, improving testability, promoting encapsulation, creating a shared filtering API with scopes, reducing database queries, and again, thinning your models. So Eloquent builders. So we're on the home stretch now. So just like with lots of things, on our which model, we're going to have a lot of scopes. I always create a lot of scopes, and I quite like to have like the inverse, just like with is admin, is not admin. I'll quite often create like a where's wicked, where is good, where is dead, where is alive. And then we might want to, where from the north, east, south, west. So your models quite often get a lot of scopes on them. But what is a scope? Well, a scope is just a method that's prefixed with the word scope so that it tells Eloquent that this is a scope. And it gets passed in an Eloquent builder. And then within this method, we just work with the builder. And you'll notice we never reference the object that it's on. So we're going to do the same thing here that we did with the collection with an Eloquent builder. So we're going to create our own version of the builder that extends the Eloquent builder. And then, just like with the collections, there's a method on the model called new Eloquent builder. And we're going to return our instance of the which builder, which extends the Eloquent builder. And that means we can move scopes from the model to these dedicated classes. So previously we had this scope where wicked. Well, we're going to remove the prefix scope and lowercase that W. Then we're going to remove passing in that builder because we're just working with the builder already. The object we're working with is the builder, so we don't need to receive it. And then we just make sure that we return the instance from the method. And that means that our API can work exactly the same. So we've got this where wicked, where from the west, where alive. And something I'll note is that this can be an incremental refactor if you want, because the where wicked scope could be on this new builder, but the where from the west could actually still live on the model. I wouldn't recommend it. I'd bring it all over in one go. Otherwise, you're just going to confuse yourself. But the point is that we're not kind of changing anything too much here. But there is a caveat that everyone needs to make sure they know about. So when you have a scope, Laravel Eloquent does something under the hood for us. If we call where on the builder, and then call all where on the builder, it's actually going to know that we did more than one where call, and it's going to group those together for us. It's going to put brackets around that query to make sure that they're grouped together. So that's a little bit of magic that we lose here. So you really need to keep that in mind if you want to go down this path. And we can see these two examples below. They are now equivalent. So calling where good or wicked using the Eloquent scope above is exactly the same as calling where, passing in a function, and using the builder in there grouped. So we just need to keep that in mind. However, there's some easy solutions. One, you can just call where and group it within your Eloquent scope. So on your dedicated builder method. However, something that I actually prefer and would recommend is creating atomic queries that do really small things. Don't create this where wicked or where good. Do that with the builder. Call where wicked or where good. So that will be able to make sure that you can kind of compose these things, because then we're going to need where wicked and we're going to need where good in other places as well. We've now got these jigsaw pieces that we can click together to create the right queries that we need. So for a full walkthrough of this that we just went through, and some talk about the refactor and the caveat, you can check out this blog post that I've written if you want to check out more. And some things that we've done here is we've utilized more of Eloquent, and we're now using the pieces of Eloquent to our benefit. We've promoted the database interaction layer. So it's not just all on the model now. We're able to use the model for a single instance and use these builder for the queries. And we're able to use the collections for the group batch processing. Queries are composable. If we go down that atomic query path, we've got these composable building blocks to make sure we can get really fine-grained control with our queries. We've also improved static analysis. So because we're using a dedicated query class, when we're calling where wicked, the static analyzers know what that method actually is. And we've left things in Eloquent, which is really nice, and we've thinned out our models. So now when we think of Eloquent, we can think of the builder, the model, and the collection as this cohesive system that works together for our benefit. So just some final thoughts. This isn't a complete list. There's definitely more possibilities that we can do and more ways to kind of demonstrate these ideas. But utilizing an existing infrastructure is really nice. A good way to kind of move things off your model to somewhere else without having to recreate any wheels. We've spread our definition of what Eloquent is by promoting collections and the query builder within our system. And just remember that we're all on the Eloquent road. There are many different paths. Just do whatever path you want to do. Lots of people are going to show you different ways of doing things. And if you're just starting out on the path, do whatever works for you to get the job done, and make sure you have fun with it along the way. And just a big thank you to Taylor for creating the Eloquent road for us to all walk down. I've definitely enjoyed my travels on it, and I really hope to keep enjoying and exploring Laravel in the future. So thanks very much. You can check me out on my website. Come join me on Twitter and have a chat. And thank you very much for having me at Laracon. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was great. love that idea with the builders and everything. I'm gonna have to like rewatch it when I can fully pay attention to like fully absorb it. But it looked really, really cool. So thanks a
Awesome.
lot.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.